alcohol, tobacco, firearms, and explosives, of course, investigating that pickup truck where that reported possible explosive devices right now.
Yeah. And U.S. Capitol Police are keeping the media staging area as far back as Constitution and 1st Street Northwest for everyone's safety. So it's going to be hard for them to get closer, but obviously you can see that huge presence out there of crews responding, and traffic in the area and local businesses want to avoid those streets that are shut down. And the U.S. Capitol Police are calling it an active bomb threat investigation. So it doesn't look like it's going to conclude anytime soon. They're going to have to get those folks in to check out the truck to see if there is in fact an explosive in the vehicle.
You can imagine, given what's happened this year alone, and really just the state of the country as far as the divisiveness and things that have gone on, and this might not be tied to that at all, but given what's happened this year and the heightened tension, and we saw heightened security for several months with the National Guard here for several months, that they're going to take every precaution necessary, perhaps not just focusing on that truck, but anything else that might be in that area, which might explain why they're kind of widening the perimeter and making sure that people stay out. You know, I think of the residents there, right? Because there was a back and forth for several months following the Capitol riot from residents who live there. You know, they're raising children there. This is their neighborhood. For a lot of people, it's just the Capitol, but people live here. And it's made it tough to just live like a regular resident in D.C. When you're seeing all of this heightened security. So seeing this again, I can imagine not only is it something that would cause a lot of tension, but can be, you know, just kind of frustrating, right? And concerning.
Everyone wants things to get better, ultimately. We want to mention, too, that Congress is on recess this week. We were talking about, of course, all of our nation's most important buildings and offices. Officials are right there on Capitol Hill. The building, Library of Congress, of course, is near the Capitol, the Supreme Court, another building there. And police have also evacuated congressional offices nearby. So there are a lot of evacuations all happening simultaneously there at the scene. They're also encouraging people to remain calm and to use the underground tunnels if necessary to leave the area. So they want to get people out as soon as possible.
And within the last minute, U.S. Capitol Police just tweeted that they are still working on the investigation and they will update as soon as they have information they can release to the public. So it sounds like they have some idea of what's going on. They're unable to release it to the public at this time. They're actively tweeting, which is reassuring to everybody out there on the scene for those immediate updates.
Yeah, you can see the scene just in the last hour. And we're working on getting Sierra back because obviously she's on the scene. As we mentioned, she was reporting from her cell phone because her photographer is just a little farther away. And we're thankful she was able to get that report to us. We're trying to get back to her, but in the meantime, we're going to pass along what we're learning and what we're seeing and getting from some of our sources. But just within the last hour, we saw that scene really ramp up in terms of just people on the ground there trying to get to the bottom of this. And as with many of these things, there are probably a lot of things that police at this point know, maybe even preliminarily, and won't be sharing, not right now, right, until they can confirm it. You don't want to raise alarm or cause concern more so than we already understandably have unnecessarily.
Yeah, it's a sprawling Capitol complex. We're talking about it. We're only able to see a part of it because of the investigation that's right now underway. But I do have some information here reported from the Associated Press that officials say that investigators on scene are working to determine whether the device that we've been talking about is an operable explosive and whether the man in that pickup truck is holding a detonator. So police are also sending snipers to the scene as well.
Yeah, apparently they are communicating with this man at the moment, trying to negotiate with him. That's all we know at this point. Information is just kind of trickling in. Obviously, this is a fluid situation right now from the looks of it, right, from this vantage point. It's just kind of static in a sense, but you can imagine closer to the scene and to where police are communicating with this man, tensions are running pretty high.
All right. Well, the Library of Congress, we know it's a very important building, largest library in the world, millions of books, recordings, photograph, newspapers, all kinds of things in there. Just to give you some background on, for people who might not have ever been inside that building, we know what the name of it is, but that's what's going on with that building. And again, just avoid that area. Tactical units there, they're still, we've been saying this over and over again, they're still trying to figure out exactly what's going on. They don't know, so they're trying to figure it out. So it's just a good idea at this point to just steer clear. This is the nation's capital. So, and we have a number of police agencies in this area. We have the Capitol Police, the Metropolitan DC Police, we have the FBI, so there are federal agencies here, there are park police, so there are a number of agencies that are here. So when these type of things happen within the city, there is a massive effort to try to get everybody in that area to try to figure out exactly what's going on.
Including the White House. The White House just releasing a statement saying it too is monitoring the situation and being briefed by law enforcement as it unfolds here. We know that media has a designated staging area down there. Sierra Fox, one of our reporters, she's trying to link up now with a photographer. I believe we have others headed to the scene. But once she gets in an area that's safe, that's one thing law enforcement wants to do. Obviously, as we report and cover this situation, we will certainly go back to her live because she's on the ground and she can just give us a better vantage point of what's happening as well as how it feels now. And joining us now here on set, we have Tom Fitzgerald, certainly a veteran at the station and in the market. What do you make of this breaking news we're taking a look at?
Listen, suspicious packages, you guys know this, suspicious packages, suspicious vehicles are not an unusual thing in your nation's capital, especially the last 20 years since the advent of 9/11. What I would say is that this is clearly a larger response than what we are used to seeing. Now, factor into this the environment that we're in right now. There is a heightened domestic terror alert in this country right now, especially after the events of last January 6th. We also have a sideline issue right now with heightened concerns over terrorism in general because of the unfolding international situation in Afghanistan right now, and actually, some legitimate concerns as to whether or not international terrorist groups such as Al-Qaeda, such as ISIS, could be reconstituted in the wake of what is going on in that country right now, with the Taliban having swept into power in that country. And as we all know, Afghanistan was the base camp for Al-Qaeda, which launched the largest terror attack in the history of this nation. So there are a lot of moving parts in our lives right now. And when you get a situation like this, a vehicle outside of the United States Capitol, which is, clearly under investigation right now for this possible explosive device, you would expect that we would see the kind of response that we're seeing right now. Now, what I have heard this morning is that basically the lockdown footprint, as some of our reporting has indicated, mirrors what we saw with that metal fence that was up from the first days after the insurrection right through parts of this summer. If you're trying to get to the Capitol, if you're trying to get anywhere on Capitol Hill, either don't or probably try to look at your Waze or your Google Maps or figure out some way around that area, because my understanding right now is that there was really no way in or out of this area. This vehicle apparently is placed somewhere in front of the Library of Congress. As we know, that is smack dab in the middle, folks, of the Capitol complex itself on the west front of the United States Capitol. And, for all intents and purposes, that entire region right now, we're not just talking about First Street, Northeast and Southeast, that entire region is locked down right now.
Yeah, avoid it at all costs. Unfortunately, we've kind of been there before, right, as far as avoiding the area because of police activity. What exactly is going on besides what we've mentioned here, we're still working on. We do have someone on the ground there, Sierra. We just talked to her a few minutes ago. We want to go back to her. Sierra, I hope you can hear me, but do you know anything more, or are you seeing anything different?
I am at Pennsylvania Avenue and 3rd Street, about 3 blocks away from the Capitol here on Capitol Hill. You can see behind me, it's a very active scene. Right when I got here, just about 20 minutes ago, police started blocking off the road, so it's very hard to navigate this area. But I actually just met a gentleman here, Lamar. He actually lives pretty close by, and he approached me to ask what is going on. And we do know that police are investigating an active bomb threat near the Library of Congress. I have Lamar here just to explain what's going through your head right now.
It's a lot. It kind of reminds me of the insurrection. I heard like a lot of police sirens earlier. So it's like, oh no, what's going on now? You know what I mean? So with all the stuff going on across the pond in Afghanistan and just locally, all the domestic stuff, it's just kind of crazy to have that on the back of your mind trying to live a regular day.
Yes, it just seems like it has been
and
one
we're still
thing.
in a pandemic. So
Exactly. One thing after another, especially here in the nation's capital after January 6th. And talk to me about the sentiment from residents. I mean, you guys had to deal with fencing up with forever, just feeling restricted.
It was I mean, you almost feel like you're in a concentration camp. No physical threats, but mentally with the cages and fencing everywhere, it's just kind of like depressing to see. So hope we don't have to go back to that. Yeah.
Well, look, stay safe. Thanks for watching Fox 5 as well. Still working to find out more information about this pickup truck that is, raising some eyebrows in this area, especially for law enforcement. We know that there are different law enforcement agencies from this area out here, Capitol Police, Metropolitan Police, trying to investigate. And a couple of minutes ago, they did ask media to move back a few just to be safe. So I'll go ahead and send it back to you.
Let me ask Fitz a question here. Fitz, there's been a lot of conversation, a lot of talk about fences in the last couple of months. A lot of people, the fences were up. A lot of people said, "Oh, these fences need to come down because they're ugly," and there's a whole lot of issues and discussions about those fences. Those fences are down now, though, right?
Yeah.
The fences that were being discussed.
The area where this incident is taking place this morning was well within the footprint of that steel fence. Now, when it went up in response to the fact that you had thousands of people who were able to get onto the west front of the Capitol and basically storm the place. Now, there are vehicle barriers on Capitol Hill embedded in the roadway surface.
You're talking about those giant steel things that they can bring up, right?
Right.
The
steel bollards,
steel.
metal barricades, which were installed in the pavement itself. However, this area in particular, right in between the United States Capitol and the Library of Congress, does not have such bollards and such vehicle barriers. Those are mainly located within the streets of the Capitol office building. So on the House side, where this incident is primarily taking place, you've got the Cannon House office building, you've got the Longworth House office building, and then you've got the Rayburn House office building. At one time, those streets were open to the public. Since 9/11, especially since the Oklahoma City bombing in 1995, we've seen a lot of those cross streets, like what you're looking at right now at the Rayburn building, are now closed off to the public. You'll remember at one time, Pennsylvania Avenue in front of the White House itself was an open through street in the District of Columbia. That ended during the Clinton administration. In 1995, the decision was made overnight to shut down permanently Pennsylvania Avenue.
And those are the some of the steel barriers that you're talking about. I don't know how they make them come up, but they pop up out of the ground.
It's a hydraulic system, and it is controlled by a U.S. Capitol Police officer who is stationed at those locations. So they will have eyes on site as to when those barriers go up and when they go barriers. Obviously, the concern here is you know, if you're trying to stop a vehicle, you want to be able to kind of put those up before a vehicle were to enter that secure barrier. Those were clearly down this morning, so this vehicle was able to access the location where it eventually wound up.
You know, you mentioned earlier, which I thought was so true. It's an interesting time in this country. Just 2 weeks ago, right? It was already was already reason for heightened concern and security given the insurrection that happened on the 6th, and then incidents that have happened since then at the Capitol. Now you have the pullout in Afghanistan and the concern with the Taliban. So. And the residents there had complained before all of this about those fences, which we mentioned before, and there was a lot of back and forth about aesthetics and then just practicability for people who live in these neighborhoods, right? They've got to walk around and things like this, and you got to imagine when something like this happens, what conversations will follow about precautionary measures and expanding, those secure barriers.
One of the things that people who do not live in our region sometimes are escaped by is the fact that Capitol Hill is not only an office complex of the federal government, it's also a neighborhood where people live, which, you know, Wisdom, as you were mentioning a moment ago, some of the consternation regarding the steel fencing had to do with that. How can I get in and out of my home? Eventually, those fences came up. Almost certainly, given what we're seeing here this morning, that conversation is going to be resparked. Remember, when the U.S. Capitol Police came out with their report on recommendations about what the post-Capitol campus would look like once that fence came down, one of the things in that report which was mentioned broadly was movable fencing. Now, it was never completely spelled out what movable fencing would be, but you're looking at possibly what an example of that might be on that video screen right there. Those stop signs, those barriers. The thought was that there would be some kind of fencing system, perhaps like a flood wall, that could raise up when they faced an incident that they needed to completely shut down the Capitol campus. About 20 years ago, the Senate Sergeant of Arms was a man by the name of William Pickle. He was a veteran U.S. Secret Service agent. Bill Pickle served in that position. He was the chief Senate official in charge of security for the U.S. Senate. This was during the George W. Bush administration. He ruffled a lot of feathers at the time because what he had said was that if it was up to him, and it was not, that he would completely shut down the entire Capitol complex any time that Congress was in session, meaning that it could reopen at times like we are right now when the House and Senate are in recess, but any time lawmakers themselves were in session, those fences and barriers would be in place 24/7 and no one could access the area. So we will have to see what the shakeout of this is.
And you know, it's interesting you mentioned that because following the insurrection, there were threats to lawmakers. I would imagine more so, or at least at the number of threats that they were receiving, probably the highest that we've seen in this country. So that comment once again becomes, I would imagine, even more relevant. But again, as you mentioned, they're on recess right now, so they're not there. But
well, in the environment we're in, Renat, remember, this is not only a past concern of what happened in January, as you correctly point out, this is a very real present day concern. Internet chatter from domestic terror groups has increased substantially, according to a lot of Homeland Security experts. Now, one of the things we're looking at right now in just the next 30 days are two events that are particularly on the radar screens of law enforcement right now and may in large part have contributed to the response we're seeing here. Number one, obviously, the 20th anniversary of 9/11, the greatest domestic terror attack or the international terrorist attack we've ever seen in this country. One of those planes, as we now know, the one that crashed in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, was headed to this location, was headed to the United States Capitol. One of the things they are also looking at, however, is on September 18th. On September 18th, police are aware that there is a rally planned by supporters of President Trump to support the people who have been arrested as a result of the insurrection. And as you might imagine, that is causing a renewed wave of concern as to whether or not the security protocols that need to be in place are where they need to be right now. Remember, in just the last couple of days, last couple of weeks, we've had a turnover in the leadership of the U.S. Capitol Police. Thomas Major coming in, taking over for the acting chief, Yogolanda Pittman. Yogolanda Pittman, by the way, who did not get a vote of confidence from the police union, has now returned to her previous position, which, as you know, was the head of intelligence for the U.S. Capitol Police prior to the insurgency.
Yeah, it's an agency that's in transition right now because Manger, we know his background. He was at Montgomery County. He was the chief there. He was previously the chief in Fairfax in Virginia. And now he's in charge of this agency who is in charge of securing that particular area. Also, I know this is not a metropolitan police jurisdiction, but this is D.C. They are there to assist. Chief Conte is new to his position as well. So there's a lot of coordination that has to go on here anytime you have something like this take place between the feds and the locals.
That was actually the question that I had. We talked about fencing, but what about just boots on the ground, surveillance cameras? What has changed since January 6th in order to avoid situations like the one we're looking at right now?
But one of the advantages of having two new leaders in these positions of the Metropolitan Police Department and the U.S. Capitol Police may in fact be, as you point out, Wisdom, these two men know each other. When Thomas Manger was named to U.S. Capitol Police, nobody around D.C., Maryland, or Virginia had to be introduced to who Tom Manger was. Everyone knew him. Most important point about that is, remember, Manger was in charge of the Fairfax County Police Department during, one of the most horrible times in our region here, and that was during the sniper attacks. He led the police department. Obviously, Chief Moose in Montgomery County drew a lot of the national attention, but Tom Manger was behind the desk in Fairfax County leading that response in Virginia at the time we were all living with these sniper attacks. So, these are two individuals who have been tested, battle tested in these situations. And the cooperation that we saw born out of need on January 6th between the Metropolitan Police Department and the U.S. Capitol Police Department, that is something that has been built on. That was a situation where they needed help. The Metropolitan Police Department responded. Other police departments responded, but clearly D.C. was the one that took the lead in that, where the police department showed up to literally engage in hand-to-hand combat, trying to keep some of those people at bay.
I want to get, given, obviously you've worked here for a long time, you're a veteran, you focus on the Capitol, just how unique of a time this is in history, right? There have been concerns about threats from overseas, terrorists, things like that. But for there to also be concern about domestic terrorism, both happening at the same time, how unusual is that? Because bomb threats are not unusual.
No.
But it's a different time.
Yeah, no, and you're right about what you were saying. A suspicious package, a suspicious